Okay, so we're going to make our first show, YammieQ show. I'm going to use the LS9 just as a demo. I can use any of the consoles, but using the LS9 editor should make it pretty easy. Making sure we got loop MIDI installed with loop MIDI in and loop MIDI out, 2 ports. See the installation video to learn more about how to do that. So we're going to I don't need to see that right now, so we're going to go here and get Studio Manager running. Loading up the various editors. Going to the LS9 here with the editor. It says in Studio Manager and Editor set the input port to loop MIDI in and output port to loop MIDI out. So in here, we look at MIDI settings, loop MIDI in for the input and loop MIDI out for the output, as it says there. And then we'll do the same thing in the LS9 editor. Check that it's loop MIDI in and loop MIDI out, which is good. And then in the MIDI tab above, select loop MIDI out for in and loop MIDI in for out. So it's opposite here. So out for the in and in for the out. If everything is good, we should be able to hit connect. And the connections are, the ports have been opened successfully. Hit OK. And let's see if it goes online. Yes, it goes online. So we're in good shape. Alright, so our first YammieQ show I'm going to create, well, let's just call it first show, and our first try. Okay, so we've got that now, and what you need to create for each show is a list of triggers and a list of cues. So the trigger is what you want to actually fire off the cues, what either a keyboard function or a function on the console, what we call a parameter on the console. So the first thing you need to do, you can't create any cues until you've created triggers. So the first thing you want to do is create a trigger. So hitting this new makes a new trigger, and this is the new trigger dialog screen. So in this screen there's lots of different stuff, but we're going to start off real simple here. Just leave everything as defaults and look to make a trigger that is nothing more than turning the first channel on. So right now, because everything's connected, anything I do on the editor will be transmitted to YammieQ. So as I hit this first channel, you'll see it says input on, channel 1 on, channel on, and then the channel is 1, value 0 meaning off. And if I hit it again, I'll get input on, channel is 1, val is 1. You'll see from time to time, you'll see some of these sort of other random number messages. What they are is MIDI messages that are coming from the editor that are undocumented. I may document them one day, but at the moment they're undocumented, and I'm currently in the process of figuring out what some of those are. For example, the select button is an undocumented function. It just comes up as 139, and the last number here is the channel that was selected. You'll notice that in Yamaha, in MIDI world, there's no MIDI channel 1, there's no MIDI message 1. All messages start at 0, so channel 1 is actually message code 0. So you'll look at the channel messages, sometimes you'll see zeros instead of ones, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So what we want to use is the channel 1 turning on, and we're going to use that as a trigger. So you figure out which of these things is the trigger you want, which is this one here. It's channel 1 turning on. Once you highlight it, this use selected message button will light up. It stays grayed out until you actually highlight the whole message. So once I do that, I can just click this button here. Brings up the trigger string. This is the raw MIDI data. You don't have to concern yourself with that, but essentially that's the code that it's that the editor and the console also use to talk to each other. While you're in here, you can see that there's information the same information that you saw down here is available up here on what that message was. And you also see the channel number and the value number, which are listed here. Interestingly, you can also go ahead and edit these numbers and it'll reflect itself in the message. So if I change that to channel 2, you'll see it changes down here to the appropriate message. Again, remember that things are zero based, so you'll see that numbers come up one less than the real number, but we're just going to leave it as 1 for now. And that's how you create a trigger. There's lots of other functions on here that we can get into in another day, but that's the first step in creating a show, is creating your first trigger. And you notice that the trigger is a MIDI trigger, so it's checkboxed up here. If you had a keyboard trigger, it would have a checkbox here, and that check mark would be on. Now you can just disable this trigger altogether just by unclicking that checkbox there under MIDI and turn it back on that way. If there was a keyboard trigger, you could turn that on and off as well, but there is no keyboard trigger, so I can't turn that on and off. So once you have a trigger, now you want to say, okay, I've got a trigger that's going to perform some function. We've got to record what that function is. So let's create a new cue. And this brings up a new screen that creates a cue. Now, cue is a recording of anything you do on the console. It can be one function, can be multiple functions, whatever you want. So we'll just call this, the thing we're going to do is we're going to make the fader go up and down. So fader move, let's say, and fader up and down. Oops, I can't even spell properly, so let's fix that. Fader move, okay. So it's an immediate play mode, which is the same matching as the trigger. It's immediate. Again, we got lots of functions on here. We can get into exclusions and auto updates, but at the moment we're going to keep it simple. So you do nothing more than hit the record button and it starts recording. You'll see a timer here showing you how many seconds have elapsed since you hit the timer, since you hit record, and that'll be used if you end up using a time-based function like a fade or something like that, and I'll show you about that in a moment. So once you hit record, it will record everything that you do. So I'm just going to push this fader up and push it back down, and that's my cue. So you'll see in here that it recorded every move. Now the way the MIDI data comes out, it comes out at periodic intervals, and all of it was recorded. But you notice that all of it is grayed out except the very last message. So the reason for that is typically when you record a cue you want to have happen instantaneously. You don't want it to happen over time, generally, unless you're doing a fade or something, but more commonly your cues will be instantaneous. For example, an instantaneous cue might be to turn these 3 channels off. Okay, so if I do that, and you'll notice again that those are all being recorded and they're not grayed out, because that was the very last message that got sent. I don't know if that makes sense, but essentially they're not grayed out, meaning that they're active, they're enabled. So if I keep recording, you'll see that if I turn these channels on, it will gray out the previous one. So it just uses the very last version of the message that you had. It records everything, but if you make 2 changes, if you turn the channel off and then you turn it back on again, and you only want one of those things to happen, it only takes the very last one. So because of that, it grays out the other ones, and if you don't want to see these grayed out ones, which you're not going to be using, you can just click this button here and it'll only show you the ones that are actually active. They're always there in the behind the scenes, but you can turn them off if you don't want to see them for whatever reason. So because of what we've done there, we've made a cue that turns the channels on when I turn this channel on. So just to see if this cue actually works, we can play it here before we've done anything with the trigger. I can play it and you see it turns those 3 channels on. Now what I was talking about before with the delay is if it turns out that you'd like to use things to happen at the time that you recorded them, you can turn on the delay, and when I hit play now, you'll see that it delays, and then after a couple of seconds this one goes, this one, and then this one. That was the way. I didn't click on those, it just ran that way. Let's do it again just so I can show you I'm not actually clicking it, it's doing it itself. As the timer hits 2, yeah, you see it goes to each one. Now these times, these delay times, are between each parameter message. So the first one is gonna wait almost 3 seconds before the first one hits. Then it's going to be 1.3 seconds after this first one hits, the next one hits. So everything's in sequence. If you want things to happen simultaneously, then you would turn the delay off, and then these 2 would happen at the same time. So just to show you how that works, if I turn these off again and hit play, you'll see that those two things will happen simultaneously. There, they both came on at the same time. So this delay time is between each parameter. Now you notice that when I'm playing this thing back, it's doing these new things that I added, but it's not doing anything with the fader. Well, it is actually doing something with the fader, but you're just not seeing it happen. It's pushing this fader, first fader, all the way to 0. So if I happen to push that fader up and then run the cue, you'll see that that fader gets pushed all the way to the bottom. It does actually fire this first cue, but you just didn't see it. And you're thinking afterwards, you're going, well, that's not what I wanted. I actually wanted the fades to happen. I wanted those the up and down of the fader. I wanted that to actually happen. Okay, so we're going to fix this so that we can see the whole movement of the fader up and down by enabling these first 49 messages. Well, instead of actually going ahead and clicking each one individually like this, there's a faster way to do it. I can hit this. I can hit the top of the column, and it highlights everything. And if I press and hold the control key while I'm clicking, it will actually enable everything in that column. Well, it turns out that I don't want these ones enabled, so I'll just turn those back off again. And in fact, I don't want them at all, so I'm just going to delete them. So I press and hold the shift key, highlight those three, right click, and I can just hit cut, or I can just select these again by pressing shift and clicking the last one, hit the delete key, and they're gone. They're history. So now I've got these functions all enabled, but I also need to enable the delay so that the timing works as well. So again, I select them all, press and hold the control key while I click that, and then now the delay is on for everything. The only time you, well, let's try that and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to turn these 3 channels off so that they come on when the delay hits. So I'm going to play, and up she goes, and down, it's there, and then on, and on. So there you go. We know that that whole thing works properly. Typically, when you at the very first message, you usually don't. The delay is set to 0, but you typically don't want the delay on the very first one because you want it to happen immediately. If for some reason you wanted that first part of the message to be delayed, you can certainly change that and turn that back on. So it can edit the hell out of it. So now when I click it, it's going to take a second before it actually starts. Start, and then it starts to move. Okay, so you can just simply I can stop this at any time. You can just simply turn that delay off if you want it to happen immediately, which is what you typically want. You want your cue to start right away. And you can pause right in the middle of something for whatever reason, and then start it again if you needed to do that for some reason. That's usually useful when you're doing a recording, is that you're recording some sequence and you just need to pause for a moment before you do something else. That pauses the timer so the timer doesn't keep rolling and you get a really strange number. Now you can edit these values as well all you want. So if I wanted to do have an even number between every movement, there's nothing to stop me from just clicking here and changing this to say 0.1, and then now all the delays all the way down are 0.1. So if I play that back, you'll see it moves at a slightly different pace than it did last time, and the timing between the messages will be now all 0.1 seconds. So again, you see it goes up and it goes down, and now the timing between here is only 0.1. So you can do editing. You can edit the living hell out of these cues and do whatever you want. So that's how you work with a cue. Now this cue is just for the input fader, so I'm just going to delete these last 3 things that turn those 3 channels on, and just gone. So now it's only input faders stuff. You can also edit the values. You can edit the channel as well. So if I hit this and hit select the whole column, hit control, and then type 2, hit enter. Now it's channel 2 that's gonna go up and down. You see, you can make a change after the fact. It's easier to record things as you need to, but that's also some editing that you can do after the fact. So there's lots of different things you can do if you want to make changes after the fact. So that's how you make a cue. So that's a queue, and the trigger was, if you remember, turning the channel 1 on. So if I was to hit the channel 1 on, it should run the queue, but because we're in edit mode, all the queues and all the triggers are disabled. So because we don't want triggers happening in the middle of creating our queues and our triggers, so it immediately tells you that there's a problem. And you can see here, if you hold your mouse over here, it says triggers disabled. So it means it did see the trigger. It knows that there's a trigger there. It just didn't actually do it, and gives you that little warning so that you know that, oh, I forgot. I got to turn it into run mode. Once you go in run mode, you can't click on anything. You can't do anything in the screen, so it protects you from making any mistakes, or deleting things, or screwing up when you're in run mode. So when you're in run mode, now the triggers are active. So this trigger was turning this channel on, and if I hit it, there it starts the queue, and the queue runs all the way to the end until it's done. And you notice it highlights the trigger that actually got fired. It also highlights the queue that got fired. If I end up creating another queue in here, it would also fire that queue. So let's take this queue, just for simplicity. Instead of recording a new queue, I'm just going to copy it and paste after. I've just made a new queue. I'm going to edit this queue, and I'm going to change this to channel 2. So now I've got 2 queues, one for channel 1 and one for channel 2. And you can look at you can keep this open while you're looking at them. You see, as I'm just moving between the two. They're identical, except one is channel 1 and one is channel 2. So if I was to fire this queue, you'll see that it's going to run both of them at the same time. And you see it highlights both, showing you that both of them are active and running at the same time. So that's a way you can just see what's going on. It does show you as it's running. It shows you what was triggered and what wasn't triggered. So for example, if I had a new trigger, I'm going to make a new trigger that's very similar to the other one, where it's just channel 2 on and off, or just channel 2 on, I should say. Now that I have that trigger, when I go to run mode and I trigger this first one, you'll see that one gets highlighted and it shows you what queue it's running. And if I was to trigger the second queue gets triggered, but there is no queues in there, so it says no matches, meaning there's no actual queue for it to run. And if you hold your mouse over top of here, you can see that, I guess if you're in edit mode, you could see that there's an error there. It's just showing you that the trigger was fired, but there was actually no queue for it to fire. So if I'm in this mode, or in this queue, I should say, and I create a new if I'm in that trigger and I create a new queue, and this queue, let's record it, that one up and down. Now it's actually going to run. You notice in this one I clicked the with delay button, which means that it automatically turns the delay on and automatically records all of the functions, so I don't have to go back afterwards and edit it. So this one is automatically recording with time. So if I hit play, it goes with time. I don't need to go back and enable those grayed out parameter messages. So if you remember, this trigger here is channel 1 on, this trigger here is channel 2 on. So if I go to run mode and I hit channel 1, it runs that queue, and if I hit channel 2 on, it runs that queue. And you'll see that it highlights the one that I just triggered, and one can be running while the other one's running, so there's nothing wrong there. I can run both of them at the same time. It will it knows what's going on. Sorry, I screwed that up. So channel 1 and then channel 2. You see, I can run them both at the same time. One can overlap the other. It doesn't matter. And what you'll see highlighted is whatever the very last trigger is that got hit, or the last queue that ran. So there you go. That's a very simple first queue, first trigger, first show. If you go ahead and you're back in edit mode, you can save this and run it. It's not a very useful queue or trigger, but it is showing you how to create your first triggers and a little bit about editing. Next one, I'll go into more about advanced queues and triggers. Thanks.